Why don't PDA kids like chore charts, or why can't they handle chore charts? Today, I'm going to talk about chores, laminated charts, routines, and responsibility with PDA kids and teens, and why it can be so confusing for parents. And I'm going to do something a little different today. I'm going to tell my son's story with chore charts, laminated pictures, and routines and behavioral charts, and illustrate what I've learned through that experience, because I think it will help us get clarity on some of the nuances and show you guys like the points that I got confused at as well. So, hi everybody. Hi from the UK. Hello from Michigan. It's nice to see you guys. Okay, so we moved from Washington, D.C. to Michigan when my son had his crisis, or what I now understand as nervous system burnout. And at that stage, I was working through the lens of sensory processing disorder. Hi from South Carolina. I was working through the lens of sensory processing disorder. And so I did not understand, I had never even heard of PDA. I didn't think my son was autistic. However, I was trying to employ some of these strategies that are recommended when kids have trouble with transitions, when they have trouble with behavior. So all the familiar ones, like using sticker charts, rewards, and, consequences, and also like laminated pictures to help them understand, like, first we're going to do this, then we're going to do this, then we're going to do this. And the premise of that is that the root cause is that my son either wasn't understanding the way I was communicating, or his executive functioning wasn't understanding sequence and like what happens when. Like, first we turn off the TV, then we get our backpack, then we put our socks on, then we get our shoes on. But he would like run away and climb on the back of the couches, and he would climb like on the window sills and edges of windows, which is like a very clear flight response, but that I wasn't aware of at the time. And so, we would have this daily battle of like me trying to get him to sit down and look at the laminated chart, and like me pointing like, look, this is what we do first, this is what we do second. And he was like, just completely fleeing me. And, it would, every single like choice point through movement towards his little school was a battle. And he would just go into full on fight or flight. But again, I was still thinking it was just sensory processing disorder. 2 months later, everything shut down and he was not in like a formal school setting for over a year. But the first four months of the pandemic, I was trying to replicate like a school setting with routines, and I actually laminated these little caterpillars for him, and at the time my 1.5-year-old, so they could like move through the day, and like we would sign in with our pencils, and then we would, at 9:30 move our little caterpillar and then go outside. And you guys can imagine like how this was for my son's PDA brain, because every single time I was like, okay, we're going to do this, then we're going to do this. It was perceived as a loss of autonomy and equality because I was the one who was deciding. So he obviously was like continually having these huge meltdowns, which I didn't understand, because I was like, well, what's the sensory issue, right? What's the sensory difference? But it wasn't that. The root cause was not sensory, right? The root cause was the perception of equality or autonomy happening on a subconscious level, right? So at that time, I was still working through that lens of like, okay, like let's laminate, let's organize, let's have routines. Like I remember the laminating, it's like traumatic, but I remember laminating like superhero figures that he was into and like trying to incentivize him to do things or give him little stars and stickers. And there was just like enormous resistance, as you guys know, because it's setting off the fight-flight response. Okay, and then I read about PDA and I was like, oh, okay, I need to stop doing this. Okay. And then for like about a year, we didn't do any of it. And that's like part of his burnout healing. But then he went to the public school, which is rife with chore charts, or not chore charts, but like sticker charts and comparisons and, you know, like behavioral ranking systems. And so I would notice this in his school, that they actually had an app that would rank the kids in terms of their behavior, and every child was completely aware of it, and he would come home and have panic attacks about it, but he couldn't control his body, right? Yeah, COVID homeschool was the breaking point for us. It was for many of us. It was sort of like a petri dish that we all had of like, you know, we have no other variables going on, right? Like there were so many other things where I was like, oh, well, maybe it's something going on at school, or maybe this, maybe that. But once they're home with you, right, like you can't unsee it. And then, okay, so I'm starting to understand like, oh, any type of ranking, comparison, you must do this at this time, is absolutely the antithesis of what's helpful for his brain. But that's part of the reason we had to take him out of the public school, because no matter how much we tried to articulate to them, like, can you not rank his behavior so that he's ashamed in front of all of the other kids in the class, they just couldn't let go of it, right? So we reached a breaking point about like 2 months into my son's, first grade year. We decided to switch to a private Montessori school and give it a try. But at this point I was like, I don't know if this is going to work at all. Like I had told him, if you do not want to go to school, we do not have to go to school, because he was like cycling in and out of panic attacks. We had just gotten a service dog, and I was like, this is not worth it. So I had made the mindset shift of like, my son's never going to go to school, and he's never going to do chores. I'm never going to do sticker charts, etc. The reason I'm telling you guys this is because I'm going to get to the point, which is like, he now does chore charts, and I want to like tell you how he got there. Not because I want him to, but because he chose them. Okay, so the only thing at the Montessori school last year that hit this part of like the chore chart, sticker chart trauma off was in his gym class. They had to do this like heart health fundraiser, and all the kids were compared to each other for how much fundraising they did. And like, it's also against a lot of the Montessori values, which are supposed to be like collaborative and not competitive. But you can imagine that like for a PDA kid, they feel like they have to participate, but they're so anxious and their nervous system is so activated from constantly feeling below every other kid who's fundraising more than they are, right? So like this was a whole event that happened with us where it's like, oh my gosh, the fucking heart health fundraiser is the worst thing ever, because like he's been able to avoid this part of his brain being set off in this great school setting, but now they have this stupid gym class that's setting it off. But it was like so clear to me that like, yes, this type of thing will always set off the threat response because of the perception of the loss of autonomy, because someone else says they have to do it, and equality because you're constantly competing. And by the way, I like was such a helicopter mom. I like emailed like every family member, and I was like, please donate hundreds of dollars because I can't tolerate this amount of stress. And some did. So we got through it. This year he has decided not to do the fundraiser, and I'm thrilled because he has much more self-awareness now a year out. But one interesting pattern that I've seen and I've heard from parents, and you guys ask about it, so I want to talk about it here, is that sometimes these kids really want a chart, right? They're like, I want a chore chart, and I want to earn allowance, or I want to have like this way of tracking my progress. And it can feel so confusing after you've learned how the brain works, because you're like, well, isn't that just like a representation of a loss of autonomy, because you have to do what the chart says. But one thing I've learned from my son and from other families I've worked with is that if they decide organically, like, hey, I saw my cousins have chore charts and they get to earn allowance. I'd really like to do that, Mom. Can we do it? Then it's like they're starting with autonomy, not just consent, but like they came up with the idea. And so you're in a totally different ball game, right? You're operating in a totally different sphere. Because once my son did that, then he would adhere to his plans of like, okay, I'm going to be nice to William, which is one of his chores that he set for himself. Like, stop equalizing for an hour and play with William nicely. Walk the dog. So we have a service dog, and like for 1.5 years, he has refused to walk the dog, and it's been our responsibility. And each week, like, he'll pick something else. But the key here is it over time becomes an internal demand or an internally perceived loss of autonomy. And as parents, we have to make the mindset shift of like really letting go of the outcome of like, great, like you want to do a chore chart? Amazing. So let's collaborate on this idea. And if your brain feels like it's too much, you can just drop it and it's totally fine. Or we can share the demand and I will help you with it. Right? And so you're giving them scaffolding and accommodation within this structure that they've chosen, right? And I just want to share it with you because it's such a huge win in our family. Not that he does chores, but he has allowed him to focus on like learning to walk the dog every day. And so he and his dad go to the dog park every day together. And what he has done while he's there has come up with the idea of starting his own business, right? Because he sees all these other dogs and it's a special interest and he's like, I want to earn money. And so he has just like together, right? Like we've made a laminated sign. I know the lamination would come up again. We made a laminated sign and put his dad's cell phone number on it and like the price of like how much it costs for him to play with the dog and snuggle with the dog and give the dog food and take it to the dog park, which is right next to our house. And of course, my husband goes with him. And he had his very first client, 8-month-old German Shepherd this weekend. And like, he just was walking around the house being like, I have a job. And I was so proud of him. But if I hadn't been flexible and allowed for some nuance in this idea of like setting a chore for yourself and a routine and having a structure, then it wouldn't have allowed him to get there. And the reason I want to mention this is twofold. Like, first, to show that like there is an evolution, but second, it's not binary, right? It's not like, oh my gosh, sticker charts in and of themselves are the devil and we need to burn them, right? It's the way that they're used with children and the way that they perceive the energy around them and the way that we use them to like use rewards and sanctions and control versus like a child gravitating towards something like, I want to work towards this. Can you help me? Let's collaborate on it. And I want to hold myself accountable. So I just wanted to share that story with you because I think it's positive. I hope it makes you feel like more hopeful. I mean, it took us like 3.5 years to get from climbing on the backs of couches and the trauma cave of the dark depths of the pandemic to like, he is now, with the help of his parents, doing his own little entrepreneurial venture, right? And it's just so hopeful. And second, to show like, there's so much nuance with so much of this, and I didn't understand it until I got further along in my journey of like, no, it's not just about like lowering all demands. It's so much more about autonomy, or, oh, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's identify the bathwater and throw that out, which is the like imposing things. So I had a bunch of comments, which I didn't look at while I was talking because I get super distracted. So my cup of writings, I am going to turn it into a podcast and put it up in my tiles, so don't worry if you missed. This is Lauren. You are so welcome. I'm glad it's helpful. in Germany. Yes, so I've worked with a family in Germany, and they said that you guys can't unschool or homeschool. So I'm really sorry that you don't have as much flexibility. Yeah. Don't they lose the drive soon thereafter when they feel internal demands? Yeah, so I mentioned that. And as parents, like, we can hold space for that and hold space for the discomfort of that in-between period, right? So, like, allowing the chore chart, as the example, to be dropped, just like a preferred food, maybe a preferred friend, a preferred activity, trying not to make too big a deal out of it because they often come back to it. And I know that it's complex when you're like thinking about relationships with their friends and stuff, but I'm just talking like high level about this. Looks like Cool Beans is working in a public school system in Canada. Since applying a PDA approach to one particular student, the change is like night and day. Yes. More educators do need to learn. Yeah. My son wants toys all the time, and the challenge for us is he can't get toys constantly. Yeah, they do have, like, my theory is that novelty and dopamine, like that intense dopamine that comes from purchasing something new, can override that constant sensation of nervous system dysregulation, which is like super uncomfortable. So what PDA resources do I use? I don't know exactly what that question is, but so in terms of like other sources, I draw on the trauma literature and polyvagal theory. I look to Christy Forbes, Harry Thompson, Sally Catt, neuroclastic and autistic writings to understand that perspective. And then I read the studies on PDA and the clinician's perspective, and I sort of bring it together using my own perspective and research background to come up with my own interpretation and framework. Yeah. Oh, my question is for the person in education. Yeah, there's a book on like PDA in the classroom that I might recommend. Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad, Rodika. Definitely feel this is, as a PDAer myself, of 2 PDA kiddos, it's a constant process of soothing myself to allow for their autonomy. Yeah. Is there life without trauma for PDA children? How can you heal it? Man, is there life without trauma for any of us in this modern world? I mean, let's just be honest. I was reading this book, What Happened to You by Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Bruce Perry, about trauma, and just got past the chapter on relational poverty, and like, one of the stats was like 99.9% of humanity has lived in hunter-gatherer tribes, and the ratio of adults to children in multi-generational clans and tribes was 4 adults to 1 child. And like now we're all trying to do it like 1 adult to multiple children, and then you add in access needs and caregiving, and it becomes super traumatic for everybody. And I think, yeah, it's just modern life isn't set up to support families, and it's even harder if you have higher needs, right? Do you have any resources for young adults navigating college? You know, when older PDAers come to me, I always send them in the direction of PDA autistic adults, right? To like, because really like the first step is supporting a sense of belonging, because often when either parents or young adults are coming to their understanding their neurodivergence, they have like a lifetime of conditioning around like things that are wrong with them, which aren't wrong, they're just their differences. So like the gateway I often recommend is not someone like me, right, who's like a parent. It's someone who has the lived experience. So I pointed people to, different social media accounts, or, the ones I mentioned. Neurodivergent Rebels, another one that I really like. But there are all sorts of like ways that kids can feel more belonging, or older kids. Yeah, do I feel that diet impacts symptoms? It depends on the kid. Like, there's an overlap between like inflammation and autism. Like, I think there's just a more sensitive immune system, and like autistic individuals are more prone to chronic illness. Like, this is shown in the research. So I don't think diet is the cause of autism or the cause of PDA, and I don't think you can get rid of it by like a gluten-free diet. However, I think there's often a comorbidity or correlation between neurodivergent brains and other, gut sensitivities. And so if you support both, then you're going to see better things for your family and your kid. Yeah. Okay, guys, I have to go because I have to be with my kids at 5, but it was super great to see you guys. I have been in survival mode myself because we just had 13 days with only 1 day of school because of power outages and sickness and all the things. So I'm back and happy to be with you guys. All right, bye.